Good morning. I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 31 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs. The committee is meeting today to begin our review of the House of Commons virtual hybrid proceedings provisions pursuant to the House Order on June 23, 2022. Our first panel consists of the Speaker, the Clerk, and other House officials, followed by a second panel of current and former members of Parliament. For the first panel, we have Speaker, the Honourable Anthony Rota. We've got Charles Robert, the Clerk of the House of Commons, Eric Jantz, Deputy Clerk Procedure, Michelle Patrice, Deputy Clerk Administration, and Stéphane Aubé, Chief Information Officer, Digital Services and Real Property. So before we start, just a reminder, all comments should be made through the chair. And with that, I will pass the floor over to you, Mr. Speaker, for 5 minutes.
Madam Chair, honourable members of the committee, for your invitation to appear today as part of your study on hybrid proceedings. Merci beaucoup. C'est un honneur d'être ici avec vous ce matin.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here this morning.
Officials from the House administration, and they're sitting on both sides of me, and as you pointed out, their names and their functions, and they will be here to assist with any questions that get asked. It has been 2 years since the House first adopted hybrid proceedings in response to the pandemic. Le modèle hybride est
The hybrid model and the related temporary changes to our practices and standing orders have allowed the operations. I'm sorry. Standing orders have allowed the operations of the House to continue. It has enabled members to fulfill many of their parliamentary duties and to participate and vote in proceedings securely and reliably from anywhere in Canada. Now that public health measures have been lifted, it's worthwhile to reflect on what parts, if any, of hybrid proceedings the House may wish to retain. To aid your study, I'd like to bring your attention to several considerations. First of all, in terms of procedure, the provisions of the hybrid model required temporary and incremental changes to the House's practices and standing orders. These changes were adopted to meet public health measures. For example, social distancing.
also led to more flexibility in chamber business, such as in counting video conference participants in quorum, adjusting the number of members required for certain procedural activities, amending the procedure by which the chair determines if there is unanimous consent, allowing members to speak and vote from any seat. And I tell you, that was a bit of a learning curve for me, because you're used to people being in certain areas, and all of a sudden, especially during SO31s or during question period, you're suddenly looking for them and madly trying to find out where they are, but that's for you to decide whether you keep that or not. And enabling the electronic tabling of documents. In committees, changes helped accommodate the participation of members and witnesses, and supported in-camera portions of and membership substitutions. Special orders also led to the adoption of the electronic voting application and that changed the way votes are requested and enabled the automatic deferral of votes to after question period. The issue of electronic voting has also been studied by various committees, including this one, for many years. This committee will now have to consider the matter in more detail, taking into account the use of the electronic voting application. The committee may also wish to recommend additional changes to the standing orders to address some of the challenges of hybrid features that we have observed. For example, matters of decorum, dress code, and backgrounds when members are video conferencing, or guidance on how the House should proceed when members, witnesses, or interpreters face connectivity issues. En plus de ces éléments de procédure,
In addition to these procedural elements, there are several administrative factors that should be examined, especially challenges relating to interpretation services. The availability of interpretation has had a particular impact on committees. They have had to adapt their meeting schedules because of resourcing constraints and to facilitate the participation of members across multiple time zones. Certain other types of activities, such as regional caucuses and parliamentary associations, have faced challenges as well. Challenges in accessing these limited resources and have had to curtail these activities. And this is very important, an important matter to consider when you make decisions here in committee. We will need to continue working with the Translation Bureau to find solutions to these challenges. The House has also made significant technological advances, including a new video conferencing system with a higher capacity and better quality for members and witnesses. This new system also benefited from a new webcasting standard for committee meetings. And I'd also like to congratulate the people who worked so hard, our technology committee who has worked so hard to ensure that everything was done properly to make our work easier for virtual meetings. They worked day and night, especially at the start of the COVID pandemic. They kept us working, and I was exhausted myself, so I can just imagine how they must have been feeling.
Seem to prefer either televised or webcast meetings and rarely depend on the old standard of audio-only meetings. There are also some big picture questions the committee may also wish to explore. For example, should the House continue to allow remote participations for all members in any situation at any time? Or should this option be available under specific circumstances that the House will define? And will these provisions apply differently in the Chamber, in committees, or in other parliamentary activities? This reflection could help to provide clarity and direction in several instances. For example, if the House retains its use of the electronic voting app, can the video conferencing system be maintained and used as a backup?
That's really some good food for thought, Mr. Speaker, and we look forward to having this conversation as members will ask some additional questions. And,
Can I finish, or am I being cut off? Okay, huh? No.
It's that time, Mr. Speaker.
Very good. I appreciate that.
We have a strict 5-minute rule.
I'll just
opening
thank everyone.
comments.
I'll go on from there. Thank
You
you.
were just getting in. So we appreciate those opening comments. And so what I'm going to do for the purpose of this meeting and moving forward is to keep us really tight and really on time because I know everybody's time is valuable. So we will start with 6-minute rounds, starting with Mr. Calkins, followed by Mr. Fergus, et puis Madame Gaudreau, and then Mrs. Blaney. They will be 6-minute rounds, which means at 6 minutes, I will be going to the next person to do their session. So if there's not enough time for the answer to come, that should be mindful in the way that you use your 6 minutes. Starting with you, Mr. Calkins.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. So how did that feel, Mr. Speaker?
Very fair.
Yeah.
Very fair.
All kidding aside, look, Speaker, I think you brought up the salient points for discussion. It should be noted, I don't want to draw attention to it, but I mean, certain times during, I've been here a long time, Speaker, you've been here a long time. There are times when members of Parliament have issues that they have to deal with, be them personal or whatever the case might be. And depending on what your role and responsibility is in the House of Commons, I think what we're talking about here is just a regular, ordinary, everyday MP having the ability to participate virtually. Are there roles in the chamber that will never be able to, in your opinion, will never be able to be addressed from a virtual capacity, such as, for example, being the speaker?
Yeah, as we're going on, you see certain roles that are essential to be in the chamber, and maybe the speaker or house leaders, but that's something that has to be determined by the committee and who has to be there. I know when we first started, some of the hybrid committees that we had were actually just virtual. They weren't even hybrid. And they were just committee meetings. They weren't actual sessions in the House. So we did actually do everything virtually. To actually start picking certain positions right now would be, I guess it would be very difficult to do. But I mean, I would lean towards something that the speaker would have to be there, and some of the key positions in the parties. But I think that would be something that the parties would have to determine themselves, which one is most essential, or which one is essential to be there.
Well, I mean, you did bring up in your comments that this committee should be circumscribing what some of those essential people in the House might be, and whether or not we should just have it open to everybody, or whether we should have very specific circumscribed roles. Have you personally given any thought to what some of those roles might be?
Given very much thought to it, and I do believe that if it is picked as an option to be a hybrid situation, that the committee and Parliament decide what the parameters are, so that anyone deciding to take part in a hybrid Parliament would have limitations. What we don't want to see is someone getting up one morning and saying, well, I'm not going to fly across the country, or I'm not going to drive into Parliament, I'll just participate, and it's willy-nilly. I think there has to be parameters for each and every participant in the chamber on when they can go for hybrid, whether it's illness, whether it's special occasions that we'll have to decide as a parliament. And a lot of it will depend on the decisions or the recommendations that this committee makes.
So notwithstanding the fact that virtual parliament did allow us to continue through the pandemic, it now seems to me like we're asking ourselves this question: which do we want to continue with this? Even though the necessity of it, the necessity or the impetus for having hybrid parliament appears to no longer be there. Are you worried about the image of us having this conversation at a time when Canadians are struggling to make ends meet? This appears to be something that could be interpreted by some Canadians as parliamentarians making their own lives easier at a difficult time in the Canadian context, rather than coming to Ottawa and representing their constituents. Do you have any concerns about the image and the institution if we choose to keep hybrid parliament?
As Speaker, that's not something that I'm really wanting to able to comment on. But I think the way that I'm looking at it is we want to make sure that we have a parliament that will work in the best capacity possible. And the role of this committee, in my eyes, is to find that best way of doing things, the best way of proceeding with Parliament, so that it works, so that Canadians get good democracy. I think that's the role of this Parliament. So to me, it's more about making sure that Canadians get what they deserve: a good democracy, a good democratic system that works.
I'd like to move on. You talked about decorum. There were some issues with decorum. I'm not going to highlight what those were, because I think there was a number of issues in a number of different cases, and I think those are definitely concerns. What do you, if Parliament and this committee recommends and Parliament adopts some semblance of keeping hybrid Parliament for the foreseeable future, how would you, or what would your recommendations be to this committee in dealing with issues of decorum? What would your recommendation be?
Well, I found that decorum with hybrid, with not the numbers in the chamber, actually improved. Because what happened is, when you're on a hybrid system, if you come out, or if you're on a virtual system for that matter, if you are going to heckle or come out and speak loudly trying to overtake someone, you not only overtake that person, you're center on the screen. And it's easy to identify who is shouting. I mean, one of the things we find in the chamber is, especially when it's a dull roar that kind of drowns everyone out, we don't know exactly who it is, and that makes it very difficult for the speaker. But when we have people in the chamber. Well, in certain cases, I see a big smile there. I won't comment on that one, but yes. But what happens normally is
the
that
optional components of decorum, but that's fine.
So that was an excellent exchange, and we look forward to seeing another one. 6 minutes pour vous, Mr. Fergus.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Mr. Speaker. And thank you to your colleagues for your testimony this morning. First of all,
Just thank you all, and so many of your team of people who are not here for bringing together the hybrid system in such short time. Frankly, you could look at a spot on a wall and say, there's a spot on the wall, or you could say, oh, that wall's, white. You guys did a really great job, and congratulations. And I was wondering if you could, just tell through Madam Chair to all Canadians, how that success story came about so quickly. Because I think, frankly, we were world leaders on this front.
we were world leaders on that, and it's something that we did put a lot of time in. But I mean, we didn't have a lot of time to put into it. That's why these 24 hours. I think it was Monsieur Patrice who described the first 2 months as well. It wasn't really 2 months. It was just one long day with naps occasionally. And the team was amazing. They came to the plate and batted a home run. Every time there was something changing, they were there with new solutions. When something would come up, there was an issue, and there have been a lot of issues. They came to, they stood to attention and made sure that everything was taken care of. A lot of the discussions that took place were not just internal here in Canada. They took place virtually with other countries in the world. New Zealand, Australia with England, or the UK was very strong in it. We spoke with the French speaker as well. And right around the world, it was global. What were they doing that was working? What wasn't working? And I've made this joke before, and I often say it's easier to learn with somebody else's mistakes. So we were learning from each other what not to do, what worked, how they made it work, how we made it work. And it was interesting because many of them were looking to Canada for the guidance. And I looked to the end, Monsieur Aubé, who is here, who was, I can't find the words to describe the energy that he had and the determination to make it work. He and his team were just out of this world. They were just constantly bringing things up to snuff. Whenever there's a problem, they made sure it was fixed.
Super, super. Et puis 100% d'accord. Puis
I fully agree. Congratulations. Despite the fact that this was a huge success with respect to our hybrid proceedings, there were some serious issues, and I think it's important not only to raise this issue, but I have a lot of interpreters in my writing, and this wasn't a huge issue for them. That is the way that the hybrid system impacted their ears, and ears are their working tool. I know that you're aware of this problem. Could you explain what provisions you made or that you are in the process of implementing to deal with this important issue for our interpretation service? This is very important for us because we want interpreters to be comfortable when they're working. We don't want it to be otherwise because, A, it's not good for the job itself. Other people won't want to become interpreters, but we also have to ensure that Canadians have service in both official languages. And right from the start, Mr. Aubé and his team worked really hard to ensure that everything would continue And you will see that the changes were made on a regular basis. As soon as we realized that there was a problem, the team looked into it. We did everything possible to ensure that the quality was there. And with respect to the interpreters, a lot of the problems occurred with respect to other departments and organizations. But with the House, when we really delved into the problem, we realized that we did have a good system, and we continue to improve this. Mr. Aubé, do you wish to add anything? Because there are a lot of technical matters that came into play as well. Perhaps you have 45 seconds, Mr. Aubé. All I want to say is that we do have an ongoing enhancement plan for interpretation to ensure that the hearing of the interpreters is protected and to ensure that the sound quality for all the participants is good. So we've been working on this for 2 years now, and we test our sound systems regularly. And thank you very much. Thank you to all of you. Thank you, Mr. Fergus. I appreciated the fact that you pointed out that you had only 45 seconds. Ms. Goudreau, you have 6 minutes. Good morning, everyone. I'm very pleased to be able to continue the discussion. This is a discussion applies. We're still in a hybrid situation. I'd like to focus on numbers so that I can better understand the situation. We've just heard, Madam Chair, we heard from Mr. Aubé. He talked about millions of dollars that were being invested into the sound system. Could you give us an idea of how much it cost for the house sound system? Do you have a figure? I can't get into specifics, but I can. But I have a colleague who knows the details. The first issue was to protect the ears of the interpreters, to ensure that interpreters were protected, and that cost about $1 million. I don't have any specific numbers, but can we ask you to provide us with the amount of investment dollars? Yes, I will look into it for the committee. With respect to the interpreters, we saw the situation when we were completely virtual. I did see I'm glad, Madam Chair, that you pointed out the need for the service in both official languages, but it's very different. There's a big difference between meetings that are virtual and those where members are present. And how many times have we heard, "I'm sorry, I haven't heard this properly," but then there have been workplace accidents for interpreters. This is my question. The use of hybrid meetings, in my opinion, we are not. Has there been a decline in the need for hybrid meetings and interpreters? Perhaps Mr. Aubé would be in a better position to answer that question. What we're seeing, Madam Chair, we are not back to pre-pandemic levels. During sitting weeks, 70% our people are in attendance now at the meetings. That's an average. But we see this is gradually going up. When the House isn't sitting, MPs are back in their ridings. But in terms of percentage, well, the figures that we see things going back gradually to pre-pandemic levels. When you talk about interpretation, and there's a scarcity of interpreters right now, how do you foresee being able to maintain the service even though 70% of MPs are now present? But given the current reality and the lack of interpreters, if I understand correctly, Madam Chair, some committees have not been able to sit because there haven't been any interpreters. Is that not correct? Yes, that does happen, Madam Chair. Committees there have been conflicts. We have over 50 committees, so the hybrid meeting reduces the work time with respect to efficiencies. Is that what you're saying? What I see, my colleague was able to get replaced personally, and so there were no problems in holding the meeting. Do I have about a minute remaining, Madam Chair? Yes? I would like to hear your view on the following matter. When an MP is in a formal meeting or appearing on screen, what's the advantage of having meetings in hallways and where there are constructive dialogues or conversations that can take place? Talk about the advantages to having in-person meetings. This is my personal opinion, not an official one, but when we're here in person, we meet in the hallways. We have lunch together. We can meet together in the evenings or in our offices. So that gives an opportunity to get to know other MPs better and to talk about things that, well, once the camera is no longer focusing on the MP, we don't discuss the matters. So I think that committees allow us to come forward with good recommendations if there's limitations put on the hybrid meetings. So I think that's going to be the challenge that we're going to have to deal with. When can we use a hybrid meeting, and when should we not use it? If the committee decides to go ahead and keep hybrid meetings. So, Madam Chair, considering that we can't have talk to all of the witnesses, I'd like to have all of the witnesses to submit their comments on work efficiencies with respect to the operations of committees, the role of interpreters. That's a good idea. Thank you, Madam. Ms. Blaney.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. And as always, everything goes through the chair, so I want to thank her for constantly reminding us about that. And I also want to thank the Speaker for dealing with such grace when he was cut off. I appreciate that tremendously. And I also want to add my thank you to everyone. Not only were we dealing with the reality of a pandemic and the personal issues that we were facing with our own families, we were asking all the people here to figure out how to continue to run this government on all levels. And I just want to say thank you and appreciate how trying that must have been on top of everything else, and how important it is that we got that work done, and I appreciate that. So my questions to the chair is, I understand that there was an audio system performance review conducted over the summer that was commissioned by the House of Commons administration. And I'm wondering, will that be able to be tabled with this committee so that we can review it?
The work was done, and there were some questions on the methodology. I'd feel more comfortable if Monsieur Aubé answered the question, or Monsieur Patrice. I'm not sure. Either one have been very good on top of this, and there's some details in there that I'm sure they can give you on that.
Madam Chair. So we did do a study this summer, Mrs. Blaney, to actually characterize our systems and measure the performance, because there was discussions and doubt whether our systems in presence were actually meeting the ISO standards. The report has demonstrated that we are meeting the ISO standards as it relates to the audio quality within our systems. Having said that, we're still in discussion with the Interpretation Bureau to actually validate and make them understand the test, and we're actually meeting again with them this week. On Friday, I'm having a meeting with them and the NRC, and I'm also We're actually organizing tests next week again to actually demonstrate the results that were actually provided this summer. As far as making the report available, our preference right now is to keep the document to ourselves until the validation is done by all parties engaged, because we've done this in partnership with the Transportation Bureau, because we want to make sure that everyone's comfortable with the results. Once that's done, I think the conclusions of the report, because it's very technical, but the conclusion of the reports could be shared. But as a first step, we want to keep them, because it's still a working document from our perspective, because it needs to be validated with our partners through the process that we put in place.
Okay, well, thank you for that, but I will say that I expect that I'll be coming back with this, because we do need to have it before this study ends, because if we're going to be making the most educated decisions, we need to have that happen. So I know that at the end of the day, the interpreters really paid a high price for transitioning, and I think that we all recognize that, and we know the challenges that we are all facing and the limits that we have to our capacity right now, largely because of the hard work of the interpreters. So one of the questions that I have is, what percentage of interpreters are freelancers? And I'm wanting to know that, and in context, I want to also ask that when they are working for our house as a freelancer, are they having the capacity to file health and safety incident reports? Because I just want to make sure that when we're hearing about the health and safety incident reports, that we're not just hearing from those who are not freelancers, but all of the interpreters that are serving us.
Actually, on that one, I think for precise numbers, I think the Translation Bureau is appearing later on, I believe this week, and it would be an appropriate question to ask them. They keep better figures, and I think it would be better if they gave them to you than us. That would be the best
So
place
do
to
we
get
know
them.
if they're able, as a freelancer, if they're able to have a health and safety incident report if they submit them?
I could not.
I would believe they do, but as the Translation Bureau is the employer of the employees, and also they're the one who retain the contractors, the
So I'll
freelancers, I
ask
think
them.
the question is better
Okay.
put to them.
So one of the things that was mentioned here by you, Mr. Speaker, through the chair, is the fact that we could look at addressing what people's experiences are and who should and should not get to participate in setting some sort of standards. I think that's an interesting idea, but I'm just wondering about the implementation. I know as the whip for the NDP, I know a lot of personal things about my MPs that I would not feel comfortable sharing with other members without their explicit permission. So if you're framing it that way, do you have any thoughts or opinions on how that would actually go into implementation? Because it's one thing to talk about it, it's another thing to implement it.
Yeah, at a higher level, it's easy to say, and that's why it's so important that this committee look at all the implementation and all the issues that come up when you actually put something into place. I mean, theoretically, I could say all kinds of neat things that sound good, but when you start looking at people's, and I would hope that this committee looks at the lives of MPs and what it involves, and if it is, say, too revealing for somebody's personal situation, how do we get around that? Or if it's something that is another situation where doesn't quite fit
Sorry
into.
to interrupt, I've only got a few seconds left. But I
Certainly.
guess one of the other challenges is, I imagine that you're updating the systems all the time to service the house better virtually. So if we don't have people using it, would you be worried about those the supports or the processes, the updates not being rapid enough?
What I found was as soon as someone brought something to our attention, the IT team was on it right away. So whether it's one person or 337 people using it, I don't see an error or any danger of the IT department ignoring it or any of us ignoring it.
Thank you. And the
I'll stop there.
IT department can rest assured, as long as I'm around, they will be employed, because I can use all the IT help in the world. Mr. Kmitch, it'll be 5 minutes to yourself, followed by 5 minutes to Mrs. Sahota.
Thank you, Chair. Speaker, on committee resource rationing, I heard 57 committees that the House has. Does that include the caucus meetings?
We have 57 slots right now available, sir, which includes the national caucuses.
How many could you do at the same time right now?
Well, currently the schedule's organized. I'll let Eric like to answer that one.
It's a block system. I think it's what, 6 we have per block maximum. And then if there's conflicts or what have you, or if a committee goes beyond its 2-hour slot, then it's up to the whips to decide, okay, what committee perhaps is pushed or outright canceled. So it's largely in the hands of the whips in terms of how to use those 57 slots.
So, Chair, this is, I think, where there's a problem. We have 4 officers on each recognized party, including the caucus chairs. And I found that during the pandemic, when I chaired the meetings of the Conservative Party, I think we were the first ones to meet over Zoom. We had no interpretation for 3 meetings. And I think that is a breach of members' privileges. We had people trying to interpret for others, and I think that's unfair. I think most of that stuff has been resolved, but the slotting system, when you're supposed to have 4 officers, and, whips occasionally disagree. We do, and we have in the past, and I've disagreed with my whips in the past while I was chair. In the future, though, are caucus meetings going to be dealt with differently? Like, can they be guaranteed that you can always get caucus meeting slots? And not just one a week. There are different caucuses that have different schedules of meetings. Is that something that's been looked at before and how they would be treated?
House leaders, I believe that's something that the House leaders establish amongst themselves on what gets priority so that the business of the House that is most important gets done. And I would not want to take that away from the House leaders because they know and they understand what's going on. And to impose something on them, I'm not sure would work out that well. So it's something that I would prefer to have them discuss amongst themselves and see what their priorities are. And having been a National Caucus chair, luckily it was before COVID, but even then you're always struggling for resources, and it's the same situation now where
But Madam Chair, just on the issue of resource, I finally get to interrupt you, which is great.
Not a problem.
I've complained to you a lot over the pandemic while I chaired the meeting, so you have many angry
That
emails
wasn't
from
complaints.
me.
That was just bringing stuff to my attention.
But the staffing, there are so many more staff now in caucus meeting rooms, especially when they're hybrid meetings. MMS staff, there are more interpreters cycling in and out as well. But just the staffing need in general of the parliamentary precinct, if we adopt a hybrid model, do we need all these people? Has there been an assessment done on the staffing needs? Will they go up or do they go down? And I mean to include precinct security. I mean to include the restaurant staff, the people who change the water, all of these people. If a third of members are not here on average every week, do we need all of these people here? What's the answer?
Depends on what they decide. We don't know how far they want to go.
I'll let you answer it.
It's a big question that you're asked. Yeah, Madam Chair.
That's why I asked it.
It really depends on how far you want to go with the idea of your commitment to a hybrid sitting or a hybrid model. If it's scaled back, there isn't necessarily the same sort of requirements. I think we would really have to make an assessment following the decision of the committee and the House to accept a certain model to work with.
Sorry. So can I then ask a question about, you had mentioned, Speaker, in your commentary in the opening about having worked with other jurisdictions. All the provincial legislatures, are any of them still in a hybrid format?
I don't believe so. None that I know of, no.
In their communications with you, then, Speaker, did they express any concerns about not continuing in hybrid format?
No, I don't have anything from them. During COVID, with our counterparts at the provincial level, or my counterparts, the conversations were constant. Alberta, Speaker Cooper and I become good friends because we were kind of scrambling, trying to figure out how we were going to do things. And that was the same with all these speakers, just trying to figure out how we can get things done. And now it seems to have gone live for the provinces.
Thank you for that exchange. And it's kind of interesting because, when you're talking to people amongst each other, we like to talk directly to each other. But we tend to, in the House, go through the Speaker and in this committee through the Chair. Mrs. Sahota, 5 minutes to you.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. My first question will be to Mr. Obey. I wanted to know more about any of the security concerns. I know in the last studies that working up to implementing hybrid parliament or virtual parliament at the beginning, um, we had looked through and there was many questions about concerns about the voting app, whether it would be secure or whether our vote could end up being somehow um, intercepted. And I wanted to know on your end, it seems to us that a good job has been done, but have there been issues on the back end that you've had that has caused you worry?
Mr. Speaker, through you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the question, Madam Soto. So IT security had to be remodeled in the context of virtual parliament. We took major steps to ensure that the proceedings would be secured and also that the members' use of our devices have been secure. As you remember, when we were sitting in front of this committee, we had actually tabled our security posture that was validated by the national security partners. So we are continuing that. We still have these relationships in play, and we continue monitoring our infrastructure. But I would say it's not related to hybrid. Every day we face threats from an IT security perspective, and we react to them in the same way that we do with hybrid. But from an hybrid perspective, we take a proactive approach because sometimes we have witnesses that are traveling, so we want to make sure that it is the proper people participating in the meeting. So we have a proactive approach that we've put in place, and we feel very strong about our security posture.
Thank you. And thank you for all the work that you have been doing because it's been seamless on our end. I myself enjoy being there in person, and I want to apologize for not being able to be in person today. I was extremely sick yesterday and couldn't even get out of bed and didn't think the people on the plane would appreciate me being on with them. But I am starting to see the light again, so hopefully can be with all of you tomorrow. My next question really goes out to the speaker. I was glad to hear that you say that, you know, there are certain things that we should be considering. And I think some of those things like, you know, are there certain roles that need to be in person? And you had said perhaps the speaker is something to consider. I think that's something that Parliament has also considered from the beginning of time. We see certain roles that we've already put in place, deputy positions there's a deputy whip. As for myself, there's deputy speakers, there are deputy house leaders, and I think that has been implemented and put in place just in case somebody cannot be there. So that's interesting, and I wanted to get your perspective also on the issue of whether democracy works. So far, have you felt that our democratic system has worked under this hybrid parliament?
No question. I mean, the participation and enthusiasm that's come in from all sides. I mean, I haven't seen anyone say, okay, we're going to stop democracy from working. Overall, people have been working well together, and I think Canadians can be very proud of the system we have. There's people who prefer to come in person, which has worked out well, and even during the depth of COVID, with the limitations, everyone got the chance to speak. Everyone got the chance to put their opinions forward within the limitations set, of course, by the parameters set by Parliament. And I think we serve as an example of how democracy can continue to work, regardless of what's thrown at it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Also, from other jurisdictions that we've seen that have turned back or reverted back because they may have only had temporary provisions in place, like our Parliament does as well, I wanted to know what your conversations were with them, because I have taken the opportunity to have some conversations for members of the UK. They have told me that politics really got in the way. And I heard one of our earlier, my colleagues mention, you know, what will Canadians think? And is this a good time to be doing this optically? And I'm wondering whether, you know, our committee's focus should be on optics or whether it really should be as to whether we can continue doing this in a responsible way. And we see now, you know, most parliamentarians want to be in Parliament. It is generally only that odd time when there is a situation that comes up that could make it unsafe for everyone there, or there is other situations that come up for their own health and family issues. So if you have comments on that.
Thank you. He will have to reserve the opportunity to comment at a later time. Thank you, Mrs. Sahota. And I see you sniffling and stuff, so I hope you're feeling better.
Much better.
Good. Madame Gaudreau, 2 minutes et demie.
2.5 minutes. I'll be very quick. I have 4 questions. How many interpreters are needed to maintain committees at the 57 number rate? I don't have any exact figures, but I'll ask the Translation Bureau this question. I'd like to know how many we had prior to the pandemic and how many do we need to maintain once we're back at 100%. And we will receive this information. Good. So action plan. We've talked about the workforce, including interpreters. We've talked about the scarcity of interpreters. What's your action plan? Once again, Madame Gaudreau, this question would be better put to the Translation Bureau. And I would ask you to put this question to them when they appear. They already have the question, so I'll wait for the answers. The Translation Bureau is hired by Parliament, so they're not our employees. These are Translation Bureau employees, translators. They're the ones who hire them. We work very closely with the Bureau. We ask for a certain level of service. And we ask them whether they can provide the service. It's not always easy. Madam Chair, I'd like to describe my experience of last week. We wouldn't be here with a group consensus if we weren't all here present. So we are able to have constructive conversations and come to an agreement. And this has been done, and I can tell you there were 4 of us. We took a break, Madam Chair, and this is just a concrete example of what we can do. And I'm sure that there are lots of other examples of this. I have only 30 seconds remaining. Perhaps you could give us a comment. I apologize, but you have no further time.
Thank you, Chair. And through you, my question is how members participate tracked? Do you track who participates virtually compared to who participates? So there's no tracking at all. Okay, thanks. So one of the things that I'm also curious about is I know that there was a pilot project of interpreters working remotely, and I'm just curious if there was qualification requirements for that and if they were qualified for that by Translation Bureau standards. I would hope that you would know the difference.
Yeah, there was serious concerns about the quality of interpretation, but to give you a little bit more detail on what those parameters were, I'll leave it to would Monsieur Aubé.
And really, what I'm trying to understand is, were their qualifications the same rigor as what is required for the Translation Bureau?
The pilot project, and as has been reported in the board's minute decision, definitely there was an aspect that required quality through you, Madam Chair, the same quality in terms of interpretation that the Translation Bureau would offer.
So the same
The
credentials,
same standards,
so the same standards. So if you
of quality.
Okay. So is there a way that that can be verified? Because I've heard that that is not the case. And so I just want to make sure that that's correct.
One of the recommendations, through you, Madam Chair, one of the recommendations, Madam Blaney, is that moving forward for now, we would be using interpreters from the Interpretation Bureau. That was one of the recommendations that came out of the pilot to the board.
Okay,
So we would use the same qualification because they would be provided by them.
okay, thank you.
If I could add on to that,
Yep.
the part of the project was to see if it was viable to go outside of the interpreters bureau, and it determined that no, for now we stick with what we have, and we might look at it down the road again, but for now we stay with what we have, and we work with the parameters we have or the limitations that are there.
Okay, well, my time is almost up, so I'll concede the last 10 seconds.
Thank you, Mrs. Blaney. Mr. Culkins, 5 minutes to you, followed by 5 minutes to Mr. Gertson.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Is there, just a quick question, are we able to maintain now with the hybrid or the virtual capability, the same operational tempo that we were in 2019 prior? Like, are we able to support at the same level or operational tempo committee meetings and so on at the same tempo?
Through you, Madam Chair, I would say not quite. There are still requests made of the House Administration for, as has been raised, caucus meetings, additional committee meetings, etc., and we're not always able to support that.
Okay.
And then, as mentioned earlier, it's up to the whips to decide what gets priority.
What gets priority? Yep, I remember that. I probably knew the answer to the question before I asked it, but I asked it anyway. I've got a question for you. In 17 years of being a member of Parliament, I've had my name only called once by the Speaker of the House, where I did not rise to speak, and it was when I was in my constituency office. And it had nothing to do with the IT capabilities of the people here, but it had everything to do with the IT and the capabilities. And I don't live in what I would consider to be a remote rural area. I live on the Highway 2 corridor in Alberta. I was unable to connect to the House, and my name was called, and I was very frustrated that my IT service provider was unable to get me connected. How often does that happen? Still.
Sylvie?
Through you, Madam Chair. I don't have the exact details, Mr. Calkins, but I can say, like, the mobility enabling requirements for hybrid are key. It's still one of the key principles. So having proper internet, having proper cloud service provider are key elements that we need to offer hybrid. And it does happen sometimes, as you remember. I've been at the House 25 years. There's only been one time that the House has been down, and it was through an internet outage during the pandemic. So it does happen. We've seen it in a limited amount of time, and it does happen to members, and depending on where they're located, sir.
In an in-camera meeting, it's fine because most of the things that we do in the House of Commons and in our committees writ large is public, and it should be public. For those times that we are in an in-camera meeting or we are in a caucus meeting per se, that is being delivered jointly through a hybrid or whatever you want to call it, virtual process, can you guarantee this committee and the members of Parliament that are currently here that everything that we do or say in an in-camera meeting, whether it be in the committee or be in a caucus meeting, is not exposed because somebody's participating virtually or through hybrid?
To answer this simply, the answer is I cannot guarantee that, sir, because I don't control the end person where they're participating. I can only guarantee the infrastructure that we provide to make sure that it is secure.
Is cabinet meeting virtually?
I wouldn't want to comment on the cabinet, sir. We do provide support to them, but I would leave that answer to the cabinet participants, what they offer from that service perspective, and who do they offer to participate, sir.
Okay, thank you. There are organizations, consultancies, professional firms throughout the world that guide corporate entities and businesses on their ability to make good decisions, that they have good governance structures. They provide business consulting, for example. Has the speakership or anybody in the leadership of that we see here today, have we consulted with any third-party organization about any post-pandemic recommendations as companies, businesses, other large organizations, other large governance bodies are trying to cope with the reality of this? Have we consulted anybody about whether or not virtual decision-making is in any way, shape, or form compromised compared to in-person decision-making?
Not in that context.
Is it reasonable to ask that we might consider looking and see if somebody does have that capability to offer that advice?
I think the job of this committee is to make sure that we get the best system possible, the best recommendations possible. And if the committee determines that that's what they want, I think it should be looked at. And I certainly wouldn't stand in the way of having a third party look at it. It has to be an impartial third party who is willing to look at all the options and recommend what they believe is best. So personally, I don't see a problem with it.
How much time do I have, Madam Chair? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Garrison, 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. With respect to Mr. Culkin's last question about ensuring security virtually, are you or is the House in any way able to ensure that a member who participates in person in a committee meeting does not release any of that in-camera information once they leave the committee room?
I guess I can answer that one. I think the answer is obviously no.
So how do we ensure the credibility of committee meeting? Is it not based on the honor of the member that is assumed?
Well, I think we're talking about two different things. One is on the honor of the member, and the other one is about somebody eavesdropping into the online.
But Mr. Obey's response was specifically about how he is unable to determine what happens on the other end. So if I'm participating from my living room, he's unable to know if there's somebody else that I've let sit out of the screenshot to listen in on a meeting, right? So I mean, in a similar vein, it's not possible to ensure that I don't leave a meeting that I've personally been involved in and go and share that information, right? And to that end, all of our committee meetings, as with our proceedings in the House, is all based on the honor of the individual. Am I correct in that?
No question. I don't know, Monsieur Obey, did you want to add to that?
No, I would agree with that statement.
I think
Thank
you
you.
have consent on
So
this side.
another.
We'll just address her comments through the chair.
Right, of course, Madam Chair. My next, she's very, very good at this. I would be concerned if I were you, Mr. Speaker. I think she's eyeing up your job. But my next question, Madam Chair, through you, would be with respect to, I know that early on in the pandemic, when the hybrid provisions were implemented, there were a few incidents in which individuals immediately jumped at the opportunity to abuse that. For example, if I recall correctly, one member participated from Oklahoma, out of the country. Another member participated from a boat on Lake Simcoe, if I remember correctly. I'm wondering if, in particular, there's any way to be able to control that an individual is actually following the rules, i.e. participating from within Canada, which is what our rules state. Is there any way to ensure that? Or again, are we relying on the member to do the honorable thing, which is to obey the rules?
I think you should start. Sir.
Okay, very good. No, I mean, when we talk about the honorable member, we talk about honorable members, people who are sticking to the rules and trying to make sure that everything works well. So yes, we're relying on the individual, and that's from a personal point of view. From a technical point of view, it's something more that I would let Mr. Obey answer, because I know one of the parameters is you have to be in Canada. Lake Simcoe is in Canada. That's not a problem. So you could be fishing and participating, which I'm not
by the
sure.
rules, as the rules are stated right now.
As the rules indicate right now, but Oklahoma is not in Canada. So, I mean, there are two parameters, and it's making sure that the individuals know what the rules are. Monsieur Obey, on a technical parameter, with technical parameters, I don't know if there's anything there that we can
I can
enforce.
just add through you, Madam Chair. We have the technical capabilities, sir, but if you remember in time, we made the decision for the honorable member, if they were not in Canada, to actually identify themselves that they were not there, because we didn't want to prevent a member to participating into an event, sir.
So I think it's fair to say, through you, Madam Chair, whatever is adopted in a hybrid model, we would equally look to apply the same standards in terms of an individual who's participating in the House needs to come from the same perspective of doing things in an honorable fashion as we would if they're doing it on hybrid.
If it's being done dishonorably, then our system doesn't work. Yes, it is up to the honor of the individual, and I'm sure that Canadian people do not elect dishonorable people.
Do I have any time left? I'll give that to Mr. Turnbull.
15 seconds.
Oh,
it's all yours.
Thank you for your testimony. Speaker Rhoda, through you, Madam Chair, you had said a parliament that may continue to function regardless of what's thrown at it.
Madame la Présidente.
Madam Chair, there's no sound.
I thought they were turning it on.
Est-ce que on peut reprendre?
Can we restart the clock? Thank you.
So, through you, Madam Chair, to Speaker Rhoda, you had said a parliament that may continue to function regardless of what's thrown at it. I thought that was really insightful. Is this study really, in your opinion, just a matter of looking at business continuity for our parliament in times of crisis?
Exactly it. I mean, not only in crisis, but how you want to look at adopting or adapting to what's out there. And that's something that's going to be key to the report that comes out of this committee, in my opinion, because we'll be able to look at it, or parliamentarians will be able to look at it and say, okay, this is the recommendation so that we can continue to make sure that democracy works in Canada.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mrs. Sahota, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, just a request to you, Madam Chair. I'm wondering if, and the committee, Mr. Obey and the Speaker as well had alluded to different studies that we've done previous to this, and I think some of the testimony and the findings from those studies might be useful. Wondering if it's okay with the committee if we allow our analysts to include reference to those studies as well. I would be referencing the study of February 2nd, 2016, and especially the COVID related studies that we've done in 2020. There were a couple of studies that were tabled.
Thank you for that. They are all related to the hybrid proceedings, I guess, so it would probably be relevant to be able to have them. I don't see any objections. Madame Gaudreau?
C'est toujours en fonction des questions.
With respect to the questions that were put today, if there are any elements that our witnesses weren't able to share with us because we don't have all day, yes, that would be eligible or admissible.
Just a point of clarification, Madam Chair, is Madame Sahota asking that we just include those studies as part of our overall report that will be done, or just that they're presented to committee members for further consideration when we do our report and our draft report, Madam Chair?
Mrs. Sahota, do you want to respond to that?
I would say both, and I'm open to hearing from the committee members on that. But if we could include them, then referencing them would be made possible, and we'd also have them to view.
I think if the House of Commons has already undertaken background information related to the utility of hybrid parliament, that is something that would be appropriate to include in the background work of any study, given that those were reports written on behalf of all parliamentarians through House administration. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Viss. Thank you, Mrs. Sahota. Merci, Madame Gaudreau. Mr. Speaker, and to your entire team, thank you for all you do. You make it look very easy. So you keep up the good work and enjoy the rest of your days.
Thank you for having us. Merci beaucoup. Bonne journée.
Thank you. We will suspend for a quick 1 minute just to switch over the panels. the second panel for our study on hybrid proceedings. I would like to welcome our guests who have joined us. We have with us Mr. Parm Bains, the MP for Stevenson Richmond East. We have Mrs. Laurel Collins, MP for Victoria. Ms. Donna Cadman, former Member of Parliament, welcome. And Monsieur Leo Duguay, President of the Canadian Association of Former Parliamentarians, welcome. We will start with 3-minute opening comments. So if you can please try to keep as tight to 3 minutes, it would be greatly appreciated. Starting with Mr. Bains. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all of the honorable members of Parliament for inviting me as a witness for this important study. I am Parm Bains. In 2021, I was honored to be chosen by the people of Steveston, Richmond East, to serve as their Member of Parliament. But well before I was elected, in my 30s, my doctor discovered that I was born with a solitary kidney, and at some point in my life, I would need a replacement. As I began my work as an MP in Ottawa, my symptoms worsened, and upon my return to BC, I was informed that my only kidney was deteriorating faster than expected. The time had come to prepare for a transplant, and I was to immediately receive dialysis treatment. To ensure there were no conflicts with my parliamentary responsibilities, I trained myself to self-administer the dialysis treatment at the nocturnal dialysis unit at Vancouver General Hospital, where I would stay overnight 3 days a week. While I waited for my transplant, it was crucial that I avoid contracting viruses like COVID-19 so that I could be operated on safely when the time came. If it were not for the hybrid parliament provisions, I could not have safeguarded my health and kept my commitment to represent my constituents in Parliament. Because I was able to virtually fulfill my responsibilities in the House of Commons and in committees, I was able to speak to bills like the Emergency Act, the Study on Military Procurement, and share an untold inclusive Canadian heritage story confronting the realities of systemic racism. I was also able to provide statements in the House regarding key investments the government is making in Richmond, over $100 million so far since 2015. I have been able to participate in all respective caucus meetings to communicate Richmond's economic and service priorities. I was able to vote on every important measure introduced in the House. In 2016, this committee released a report titled Initiatives Toward a Family-Friendly House of Commons. Although the virtual proceedings were not one of the recommendations, the hybrid provisions are vital to the pressures caused by uncontrollable long absences from Ottawa. The hybrid provision allowed me to fulfill my parliamentary obligations, limit my exposure, maintain strong mental health, and reduce the fears my family had as they supported me through my health journey. I would like to end by thanking all the medical professionals, the dialysis unit, Canadian Blood Services, the organ transplant team at Vancouver General Hospital for making it possible to appear before you all. I received my transplant in August. I am very fortunate and extremely grateful to be able to continue serving this city. I was raised in Richmond, and the province I was born in, British Columbia. I look forward to joining my colleagues in the new year in Ottawa. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bains. We look forward to seeing you back in Ottawa, too. I didn't know that, so I thank you for sharing that with us today, and I wish you good health, and thank you. Mrs. Collins, 3 minutes to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank the committee for the invitation to speak here today. The work that members do in the House of Commons and in committee is vital. Critics of hybrid parliament often imply that virtual work somehow results in members doing less work. So I'd like to share 4 examples of how hybrid parliament has given me the chance to keep working when I otherwise would not have been able to. The first example I want to share was when I was pregnant, and at that time my midwives recommended that I not travel in my 3rd trimester. I wanted to keep working, and virtual parliament allowed me to continue participating in debates in the House of Commons, to vote, to question ministers in question period, to continue my work on the Environment Committee, and to continue bringing my constituents' concerns to Parliament. For those 3 months, if we hadn't had virtual Parliament, I wouldn't have been able to do any of those things. I wouldn't have been able to do my job. Instead, I was able to continue working into my 9th month pregnancy. And not every woman wants to do that, but every woman deserves the choice, and women deserve the choice to participate. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. If you want more young women to enter politics, if you want more women to stay in politics, make Parliament more family friendly. And hybrid Parliament is a tangible way to do that. It connects to my second example I'll share. And now, as the parent of a young infant, being allowed to work remotely when needed means that I've had the flexibility to keep working even when we've had occasional childcare challenges. And the third example is when I was sick. Like many members who got COVID-19 this past year, I followed public health guidelines and isolated. I wouldn't have been able to continue work if it weren't for virtual Parliament. I participated in committees, I voted, I rose numerous times in the House, all while isolating. And the last example I want to share is when my father passed away. I was able to fly home to visit him while he was still lucid, to keep working while remaining close by. And then a couple weeks later, I was grateful to be able to quickly get to the hospital when the doctor called so that I was present when he passed. Virtual hybrid Parliament is fundamentally about giving flexibility to members to ensure we can continue to participate. When members are sick with COVID or with other illnesses, when members are in the later stages of pregnancy, when they have a family emergency, this is a tool that allows us to continue to carry out our duties as members of Parliament. I hope that hybrid Parliament is strengthened to make sure that there are more stringent accountability requirements for the government, for ministers, but also to make sure there are enough translators and policies to deal with technical difficulties and interpretation challenges, so we take care of the health and safety of workers and ensure members can participate equally in both languages. I hope that you make hybrid Parliament permanent so that we can make Parliament more accessible for future members, especially women, especially members with young families, especially members with disabilities. Make hybrid Parliament permanent because it's an important tool to increase participation and representation and make Parliament more equitable for all. Thank you.
Thank you for those opening comments. Mrs. Cadman, it's nice to see you. Welcome to committee. 3 minutes to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Good morning, and thank you for allowing me to participate in this discussion. Something happened this weekend that made me stop and say, what the fuck? Why do shitty things happen to good people? I've known my sister-in-law's brother and wife for some 30 years. Over the years, they've lost a son to a motor vehicle accident. And a year and a half ago, their other son became a victim of the opioid crisis that we find ourselves in. 3 weeks ago, the wife was diagnosed with cancer and died Saturday. So here he is, my sister-in-law's brother. He's all alone. His family unit that he and his wife had created is gone. Anyone's life can change in a blink of an eye. I know this all too well. October 18th, 1992, we were thrown into every parent's worst nightmare. While walking home from the bus stop, our son Jesse and 2 of his friends were set upon by 6 other older and bigger youths. The ensuing scuffle, Jesse was stabbed in the back, which pierced his heart and lungs. A quarter of an inch would have made a difference. A young man's life cut short at 16 in a matter of minutes. 93 to 97, my late husband and I were with incredible friends, formed a nonprofit organization called CRY, or Crime Responsibility in Youth, to lobby for changes to the Young Offenders Act. June 97, my husband Chuck was elected MP for Surrey North. In 2004, Chuck was diagnosed with cancer. And the following months were filled with doctor appointments, surgery, chemo, and drugs. Physically, it was getting harder and harder to travel back and forth from our home to be in BC to Ottawa. His last flight from Ottawa was May 2005, after the vote that saved the government from election. He died on July 9th, 2005. 3 years later, I was elected to Surrey North and served from 2008 to 2011. So I can speak as an MP and a spouse from experience. Our point of being elected is to be the voice of our community that elected us. Sitting in Ottawa does us no favors. The jet lag of back and forth traveling can play havoc with your health. And in our case, it was only 3 hours twice a week, but you counted door-to-door travel, it added on 20 hours. For some MPs, it was worth. But COVID changed everything. Virtual meetings became a normal way of conducting business and keeping in touch with friends and families. Chuck would have loved to have been able to participate while recovering from surgery. Mentally, he was fine, but the body was suffering. You can't ignore the fact that jet lag plays a prominent role in a person's health with multiple time zones. The thought of staying in the riding, but still participating in government proceedings, wow, this sounds so good. This October 18th is our 30th year since our tragic family event that drove both my late husband, Chuck, and myself into politics. Much has changed, but much hasn't. We need more efficient government for our constituents. Let's not tradition be an enemy of our progress.
Thank you. Thank you. And Mr. Duguay, over to you.
Alors, merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to thank you for having this opportunity to talk to you about a subject that has been close to my heart for a long time.
1985, when I was first elected, our government had started a committee, a special committee on the renewal of Parliament. I asked the Prime Minister if I could be part of that committee, and so I was named. It didn't take very long in a short meeting with the chair of the committee, James McGraw, to realize that when people talk about renewing Parliament and making changes of Parliament, there is an incredible kind of momentum that drags it back to where it has always been. In 1985, I wanted to look at two things. One, to look at electronic voting, and two, to look at improving the House of Commons, looking at particular at question period, which, as you know, is a show and takes away from committees where a lot of you do some magnificent work. So having said that, I'm in Charlottetown today and could not participate in this meeting if it were not for Zoom. So I think it speaks for itself. The three other panelists have made the case for why we need to have a hybrid parliament. I want to make the case simply to say there are lots of safeguards built into this. I mean, there are whips in our caucuses, and there is the electorate, and there is the speaker, and I think we have an incredible ability, as your speaker currently said, of dealing with honorable members. When honorable members don't act honorably, someone else usually takes that into consideration, and that is usually the electorate. And I want to just close with an offer. I've been speaking with some of my colleagues. By the way, the Association of Former Members of Parliament and Senators is an association to which all of you will one day belong. I just want to hope for you that you belong to our association at a time of your own choosing, because we've got a lot of members of our association who did not choose to be ex-members of Parliament, but they are. And I close with this one offer. Former members have time on their hands, they have expertise, and they care a lot about democracy, and they care a lot about Parliament. Our association would be pleased to put together a special committee of members of all political stripes and ideas to look at the renewal of Parliament. And Parliament's renewal is a complex thing. Hybrid Parliament is one aspect of it, and I think there's very strong agreement to continue a hybrid Parliament, but there are a lot of other things that could be done. So simply put, if you ask former members of Parliament who care a lot, if we want to help, the answer is yes, we care and we will help.
Thank you so much, Mr. Duguay, for your words and for your offer of help. We're now going to enter into 6-minute rounds. We will start with Mrs. followed by Madame Romanado, puis Madame Goudreau, and then Mrs. Blaney. 6 minutes. Just a reminder to have comments all addressed to the chair, as well as to our guests. Please to respond through the chair as well.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And I want to also thank, through you, to all my colleagues and the witnesses who have presented and are contributing to this important discussion. We know that the work that we do as parliamentarians has a real impact on the daily lives of Canadians. And I think that's why it's so critical that these discussions center around efficacy and also efficiency, so that any resulting recommendations from this study don't serve us, but that they are better serving in the best interests of Canadians that we serve. I think that's very important and should be top of mind. In discussing the hybrid parliament, we know that there's obvious discussions around the work-life balance, and it's an impact that it has on the abilities of MPs to perform their fullest in their job. I am a mother of 4 young children. I had my most recent 5 months ago, and I would propose even that hybrid parliament has its own challenges that we've all endeavored. There's an expectation that members of parliament are fully engaged in parliamentary work, which I absolutely agree we need to be in order to be successful for our constituents. And when you're home in the riding, there are other priorities and responsibilities that are competing for our time. Each and every one of us know that. Whether that's family obligations, local events, local engagements, there seems to be an expectation that because you are physically present, you can do all of these and that you can do it to your fullest. And I would say in reality, that is actually to the detriment of us executing our parliamentary responsibilities. And we've come across limited resources within committees, when we're doing hybrid. And I'm just wondering, I know all of us have experienced either committees that couldn't be extended due to lack of resources, or sound checks have gotten better than they were in the early days. But I'm just wondering to the witnesses if, through you, Madam Chair, that they would agree that the committee work that is done is critical to the parliamentary process, and that this work should not be limited by resources. Yes.
We'll go in the reverse order. Mr. Duguay.
Well, I'll leave the question of resources up to you. That's your job, not mine. But I can only reiterate what I feel very strongly about. The best work in Parliament gets done in committees. And other things sometimes, including the question period, detract from the excellent work that members of Parliament do. So I think you should try to do everything you can to make sure the committees are fully resourced.
Mrs. Cadman? You're on mute.
Yes, I think the committees should continue. We have to have the committees. And if we can I still think you can do things over the internet. It's been proven that we can do it. Security, of course, has to be tightened. And the security, I think, that could be tightened is in the back end, not necessarily with us, the people that are using it, that are getting 3 to 4 meeting IDs, passwords, too many passwords and stuff. I would suggest that you start thinking about the back end instead of the front end. Thank you.
Mrs. Collins?
Yeah, I think the work that we do in committee is vital, and a lot of really important amendments come forward for legislation. I just want to remind the committee also that for members who are sick, for members who can't travel because they're pregnant, for members who have things come up in their life, they wouldn't be able to participate in committee at all. And so without these options, it means that many members won't be able to always actually take part in committee. And I think that is really what we need to focus on.
Mr. Baines?
Yeah, I'm not sure, I witnessed any, limitations in the resources. I understand that there's some challenges with making sure our interpreters are available. But, not only was I able to fully, meet the obligations of my committee work, preparing for questions and everything that's associated with the committee work. But we also have pre-committee meetings, which I was able to fully participate in and to meet with our caucus and ensure we understand what reports are coming out and the level of the studies that are
Madam
being
Chair.
done.
Can I just get one? I just want to get one more quick question in there. I think we have to be careful as parliamentarians about setting a precedent of working while you're sick. I don't think it's actually good for physical health or mental health to put ourselves in situations where we might not be there in the headspace. Sometimes our body actually needs to be taken out for a while so that we can heal. But regarding resources too, Madam Chair, I mean, I've participated in committees where our committee actually has been canceled because of lack of resources, rooms, or translators. So I think that's something that should be top of mind as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Romanado, 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And through you, I'd like to thank all of the witnesses for sharing their stories with us today. And I think this is very helpful for us in terms of deliberating whether or not hybrid parliament should continue. I'd like to start with my colleague, MP Baines. It's great to see you on the screen, and I'm really looking forward to having you back in Ottawa when it's safe for you to do so, and I'm glad you're taking care of your health. If you could elaborate a little bit with the committee, you mentioned that while you were ill and of course in line to receive a transplant, that the travel was not possible for you, but you were still able to be the voice of your constituents in Ottawa through the hybrid provisions. Can you elaborate a little bit about how that ability allowed your family also to put at ease that, you were not putting yourself at risk to come to Ottawa, but still able to serve your constituents?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Through you, Madam Chair, the travel, it was not possible to do the travel because every other day I would have to go to receive the dialysis treatment. However, because I was doing it overnight, I was able to fully commit myself to the work that I needed to do. And in addition to that, I was able to meet with stakeholders, identify priorities in my community, meet with the city, whom they said that in previous years they had never, some of the different departments. I mean, you see your local mayor, you see your local councillors at events and things like that, but there's various departments within the city, the engineers, the city manager, the planners, who I needed to speak to, to talk about affordability and the housing initiatives that we have, the various programs that we can deliver. So it was really interesting to hear them say that we've never even met our member of parliament in previous years. So, it gave, and I think the member prior to us who said, this shouldn't be for us, it should be for the residents and the citizens of Canada. This should benefit them. And I believe me doing that work was actually benefiting them even more because I was able to ensure that I can schedule things where I'm meeting with stakeholders and committing to the parliamentary work, getting online and really managing both aspects of it and being able to really deliver and deliver on the priorities that are needed in my city.
Thank you very much, MP Baines. And next I would like to go to MP Collins. You actually highlighted four situations in which hybrid parliament allowed you to continue doing the work that you do and representing the citizens here in Ottawa. We've heard this, and please pardon my language, but shit happens. and people don't always plan for illness. Who plans for an illness? Who plans for, the child care, daycare's closed down because there's an outbreak of gastro or something that happens and you have to stay home. And this hybrid provision has allowed MPs to continue the work that they need to do while taking care of business that unfortunately has come their way in certain situations. Mr. Duguay, vous avez mentionné le fait.
You said that you had spoken to various former parliamentarians. Did you get any comments about hybrid House provisions? If there had been one when you were in Parliament, would have this been something that they would have supported? Or is this something that deserves more thought? The vast majority of former parliamentarians feel very categorically that if we had had a hybrid parliament when we were in office, we would have been able to participate more. The analysts said that there are many reasons why we should have a hybrid parliament. These reasons applied back to when I was in office as well.
Thank you so much. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Madame Cadman. First of all, my deepest condolences for all that you and your family have gone through. And I can't even imagine, and I want to thank you for your advocacy for victims in your son's name and for your continued work in that field. If you'd like to reflect on what you've heard today in terms of current parliamentarians able to continue to do the work that they're doing, if you would like to make any comments on that. Thank you.
Well, one thing I'd like to say is that our community elects us to carry their concerns to Ottawa. Being in Ottawa all the time, especially from BC or any of the outer areas from the center of Canada, you hear very, very little news in Ontario about what happens elsewhere. It's usually just Ontario and Quebec. I'm sorry to say that, but that's the way it seems. Out here, we hear about everything across Canada because we're way out here. They do it on the East Coast too. If we're not in our communities listening to the people that elected us, we're not doing our jobs. Right now, I want just one thing, please. Okay. We spend usually 3 weeks in Ottawa, 1 week at home. We should reverse that. 1 week in Ottawa, 3 at home. Thank you.
Thank you. Madame Goudreau, 6 minutes à vous.
Mrs. Goudreau, 6 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. We talked about distances. I'd like to inform my colleagues who are here, Madam Chair, that even in Quebec, there are MPs that have to spend 10 hours in the car. Or you say, take the plane. Let's talk about the possibility of having access to planes. You have to be very vigilant. I've just come from Vancouver 2 months, I was there 2 months ago, and it took less time to come from Vancouver than to go to the Gaspé or the North Shore. Inaudible. I took the plane. I had to be there 2 hours ahead of time, but it didn't take 10 hours, less than 10 hours. So that's one thing. I would also like to inform you that all this vigilance that we have to recognize what has worked well. Among other things, think about the app. You will recall, Madam Chair, you can remember it took an internal time to vote, and with the app, now we've been able to increase the number of MPs who vote. That being said, for the witnesses who are appearing now, Madam Chair, I note that I have a lot of sympathy for the experience. And my first question is for Mr. Baines. First, at the outset, do you miss working on the Hill? Because if I understand correctly, you have been absent for quite some time.
Thank you for the question, and I apologize. My French is not that good. I will be speaking in English. Yes, of course. I miss, seeing my colleagues and being able to discuss important work face to face with them. However, I have a tremendous amount of respect for all my colleagues. They've been extremely supportive. Many of them call me throughout the week and over the time that I've been absent from the Parliament, and I have great relationships. I have built great relationships just being over the phone through various caucus meetings. And again, the hybrid options allow me to do that and remain in touch with everybody. So although I do miss being there and being physically there and doing the work there, I've had all the opportunity to ensure that I'm developing strong relationships with my colleagues. I am a rookie MP. It's my first year, and I've been able to develop strong relationships.
Moi, j'ai beaucoup de soucis.
I have a great deal of concerns in the sense that I'm a mother, and work-life balance is important. Every party can come up with its own procedure because obviously we want to have more youth, more women in politics. We all agree with that. And Madam Chair, the question is for Mr. Baines. Do you feel that hybrid Parliament, yes, I do understand it allows you to keep in contact with colleagues, but have you had to work more more on your work rather than on your health? Did you work more? Because there's no reason for not working hard.
It's a tough question, but it's hard to measure because I'm not afraid of doing a lot of work. So I'm not sure, if I was doing more or less. But I think being accessible, it could allow you to actually do more and be more productive. And with respect to, you're not being challenged with the travel time or getting here to there, being late for things. You have access and you're there and you are actually ultimately more accessible. So I would agree with you. I think that you end up doing more work when it comes to hybrid Parliament.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. My final question is for Mr. Duguay. You have been following Parliament since 1985. You've had an opportunity, and through you, Madam Chair, you've seen all of the technological changes. You said that it was here in the committee that it was especially important to be here in person. Madam Chair, our witnesses missed certain discussions that were carried on outside the committee room where we could exchange informally. Video conferences with witnesses, would you be in favor of maintaining this type of procedure in committee rather than the hybrid format? I would say the same thing applies to committees as applies to the House. It seems to me that it's responsible to have hybrid committees that allow people to attend virtually or in person. I would repeat that I am categorically, as are my colleagues, in favor of making it possible for MPs not to always have to travel to attend committees. Thank you, Mr. Duguay. And Ms. Gaudreau. You have 6 minutes, Ms. Blaine.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and as always, through you. My first question is for Ms. Collins. I really appreciate the information that you shared today about your specific challenges. And I actually want to say how much I appreciate all the speakers sharing, in some cases, some incredibly personal stories. And I apologize that we're in a situation where we sort of have to force the members to show their most vulnerable realities so that we can talk about why it is so important to talk about hybrid parliament. But one of the things Ms. Collins mentioned was making Parliament more accessible. We know that we still do not have the representation of women within Parliament that we want to see, that we've never sort of reached that threshold, and we're all working towards it. I believe every party is committed in different ways and levels. I'm just wondering if you could talk about how this really allows you to be able to meet your commitments as a parent and to meet the commitments to your body to carry a child, and what this means potentially in the future for women who are looking at joining us here in Ottawa.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And I think fundamentally we need to encourage more women to run. And my experience when talking to especially young women, especially women from my area here in BC, it's incredibly hard to convince and really, you have to be honest with them that when your commute is minimum 10 hours door to door, oftentimes much longer, and then, on top of that, just the time that you have to spend away from a young infant, the demands of this job, it's a challenge. And the more that we can make Parliament family friendly, we know that is going to increase women's participation. And, the Library of Parliament did a study. Their report said, there are 7 key factors that contribute to barriers that women face. And one of those key factors was the absence of family-friendly and gender-sensitive workplaces. It's vital that we address this for future parliamentarians, for representation, for equity. But a lot of the time, I think we also miss the conversation around people with disabilities. And this technology opens up the possibility for many people with disabilities to run and to be a member of Parliament, even though maybe their health or their disability might have disallowed that in the past. So I think it's critical that we look at this and really look at how we make Parliament more equitable and more accessible.
So thank you for that. And one of the other questions that I have for you, Ms. Collins, it's very odd to keep calling you that, but we'll go with it, is how is hybrid Parliament also helpful when you're in Ottawa? Because I think we forget that we used to not have a voting app, which meant that people who had small children were often not able to be there to read stories and tuck them in at night. And we also know that things happen, as it was so eloquently said earlier. And I think, sometimes terrible things happen, but if we're able to step out of a room and vote, it really makes sure that we're able to express what we're hearing from our constituents. So I'm just wondering if you could talk about that as well.
Yeah, and honestly, it was transformational for me, especially as the mom of a young infant. Being able to vote electronically just made such a huge difference in terms of the time that I could spend with my daughter, especially in those early months. And I think, some of the questions from the previous MPs were around, did this mean more work? And I would say, yes, it did. I was working more on my parliamentary duties. I was working more when it came to in the constituency and hearing from constituents. I was also doing a better job as a mom, as a parent, and as a partner. I was able to do all of these things much better. And I love my job. It's such rewarding work. It's such a privilege to represent the riding of Victoria. And, you know, if we go back to a world without virtual parliament, you know, I'm committed to running again in the next election. I don't know if I would choose to run again after that. And I've spoken with other members who have young families across party lines who have said the same thing. You know, we have opportunity to make Parliament more accessible, to allow members to be better at their jobs and also, you know, better at fulfilling the other duties in their lives. And I just want to also mention the piece around working while sick. You know, I agree with the member who had mentioned that we don't want to kind of normalize the idea of working while sick, but that's actually happening in person. And it's scary because that oftentimes will spread disease. But there are all kinds of illnesses and diseases, and we want to give members the choice. We want to give women the choice. We want to give women or people with disabilities the choice. We want to give members the choice to do this work in the best way possible.
Thank you so much. And if I could just come to Mr. Baines and just ask specifically around how having the voting app applicable, how that impacted your ability to address your serious health issues.
Well, very simply, when at the outset of when my symptoms worsened and I had to train myself with the dialysis treatment, there was oftentimes I had a lot of doctor's appointments, and it allowed me while being there and, you know, being excused from certain duties at the time, it allowed me to ultimately not miss any vote, and, you know, the important motions and bills that are introduced, I was able to, you know, vote on every single one, and I didn't miss one because of that app. So very simply, the accessibility was extremely important.
Thank you, Mr. Baines. We will squeeze in 2 quick 5-minute rounds with Mrs. Goodridge, followed by Mr. Turnbull. Mrs. Goodridge.
Thank you, Ms. Chair, and thanks to all the witnesses. So I'm the Member of Parliament for Fort McMurray Cold Lake, and I was, before this, the MLA for the riding of Fort McMurray Cold Lake, and I actually resigned my seat at 38 weeks pregnant to run in the 2021 election, and had my son in the middle of the election and came to Ottawa for the first time with a 5-week-old. And my husband luckily took a parental leave and supported our family as we did the back and forth with an infant for the first year. And that was spectacular. And I think that some of the virtual options, specifically the Vote app, gave me a space where I knew that there was always an option. And I think that I would argue that that is important function that should continue. I think that that opens it up for more than moms, because there's amazing dads, and we have to stop talking in this gendered space that only the mom is the primary parent. Because in my household, that's not the case. My husband is the primary parent. My husband is the one that takes care of my son when he's sick. My husband was the one that was up 5 times last night, not me. My husband's back home in Fort McMurray with my son. And I really am disappointed with some of the conversation as this is only going to open things up for moms. No, this is going to open things up for people. So I'll get off my little soapbox on that one. But I do think that it's important that we keep that in mind. If we're wanting to have more women and more young people in politics, we have to stop gendering this conversation that it's only good for moms. This is good for people. But I think that I have seen in the year that I have been elected here, a lot of abuse of the virtual system. I've witnessed someone use the virtual parliament from in a washroom. I don't understand why someone thought that was an appropriate way to be participating virtually in a washroom here in the West Block. But that happened. And I think that we have seen so many abuses, and there is a real conversation that in order to strengthen this, to allow for people who have legitimate good reasons to support their parliamentary duties, there needs to be parameters put in place so as to not cheapen it, so that at some point Canadians reject this idea completely. So my question to Ms. Collins is, would you agree that there should be, or what are your thoughts on having parameters around how people can participate virtually, and what kind of parameters would you like to see?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I mentioned in my opening statement that I would love to see hybrid virtual parliament strengthened. And I think there needs to be more accountability for ministers and for the government. I think when you take on the role of a minister, there should be some accountability in terms of being able to answer what that looks like. I think that this committee should be looking at and should get the best expert advice. I think we do need to ensure that we have all of the resources when it comes to technical pieces and interpretation so that virtual parliament is strengthened. I think there were hiccups in the beginning, and the more we do this, the better it can be. I just want to also mention that, like you, I was lucky enough to have a partner who he took 14 months of paternity leave, and he traveled with me to Ottawa. He's now back at work, and he has to travel. He has a very busy job. He has to travel for work.
Thank you. I don't have very much time left, so I
wanted to mention single parents.
I just
want
to
open that up
know
for them as well.
I appreciate that, and perhaps at some later point someone can bring that up. But the piece that I want to jump in on this is the fact that so in the province of Alberta, we sat as a legislature through most of the pandemic. We had different social distancing rules. We sat in person. And at a certain point, when there became concerns around overall continuity of the legislature, we brought in provisions that allowed for voting. So you could vote virtually, but you weren't allowed to interject into speeches virtually. In the government of Alberta, you've always been allowed to participate by teleconference or video conference in committees. But in the chamber itself, there were no interjections allowed virtually. I would recommend that as this committee go forward, they look at some of the best practices from different provinces and other jurisdictions, because I think that there are ways of strengthening this, as Ms. Collins alluded to and some of the others, that could build upon some of the best practices found in provinces like Alberta. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Goodridge. Mr. Turnbull, quick 5 minutes.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Ms. Cadman, my questions will be for you. I just wanted to say, first of all, thanks for being here today. And I also want to express my heartfelt condolences for both of the losses that you've experienced. I understand your husband, Chuck, passed July 9th, 2005. That's 17 years ago, of a malignant melanoma, and he faithfully served as the Member of Parliament for Surrey North until his final days. I wondered if you could share with us what that experience was like for you, and specifically, watching his 2-year battle with cancer and his health decline, and the toll that the travel to and from Ottawa each week must have taken on him.
Yes, it was very hard. The first 2004, when he was diagnosed and had surgery, that was not too bad. And he couldn't travel because the body was just not healing as well as it should have. Mentally, he bemoaned the fact that he couldn't be doing his work. He had his secretaries and LAs coming out, giving him stuff. He's working at home. If he could have seen his colleagues, he had so many across parties that it would have given him a little more oomph, maybe a little more hope, a little more smiling and reminiscing with colleagues. It was very sad. The back and forth was way too hard, and his last flight out was very hard for us. He came home and he was in bed for like about 5 days, could not move, just worn out. And that's a hard thing when he loved his job. And I know when you're an MP, you're there for a reason, and the reason is the people that elected you. We have to be there for them. Thank you.
So do you believe that the travel to and from Ottawa, in fact, exacerbated his health decline in any way?
Yes, I do. I really do. The back and forth, I mean, when you come here, you've got a 4.5, 5 hour trip. You get off your plane. Sometimes you have to go to another meeting. It's hard, especially when you've been up since 3, 4 o'clock Eastern time and coming out this way. Yes, travel is hard, not just for us, everybody.
Thank you, Ms. Cattleman. I just wanted to ask you one final question. How do you think things might have been different for you and your late husband and your family if Chuck had had the opportunity to participate remotely in Parliament like we have today?
Would have made it a lot easier for us. Watching him decline when he wanted and could participate was harder than anything of watching him slowly decline. That part of the politics that he loved, it was taken away from him. It was very hard. And I think that ended his life a lot sooner than maybe what it should have or could have.
Would you say, in a way, that having hybrid Parliament accessible for people like your husband in those circumstances would have added a little bit of humanity to, to someone who was committed, obviously, to doing his job until the end, but just knowing what you experienced, would that have added a little bit of humanity?
Yes, I think it would have. It would have made him feel like he was still part of the group. It's a very close. Politics is very close. You're with your friends, your other. He was just cut off, and that was hard. Yes, I think it would have helped.
And lastly, do you think that you would have had more quality time with him if he hadn't have had to travel to and from Ottawa?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. The last year of his life was very hard, coming back Friday night and then going back either Sunday night or Monday. He'd spend like most of the day in bed on Sunday just so he could get up and go back to Ottawa. So, yes, travel's hard for everybody.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cattleman.
Excellent. So from Baines and Laurel Collins and Donna Cadman and Leo Duguay, on behalf of PROC committee members, thank you so much for the time. It's flown by, and I know Ms. Collins, you wanted to add something, and so I'm just saying to anybody who wants to provide anything to us that you would like the committee to consider, please do send it in writing to the clerk, and we will make sure that it is circulated. With that, I hope everyone keeps well and safe, and we will see you soon.
So can you outline when submissions would be due for consideration by the committee for our witnesses?
We can figure out, we can get a date. Well, when we amongst members, we'll figure out a date. I'll talk to the subcommittee and find out what we would like to do.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
No problem. Thank you, and have a good day.